Welcome to this very special presentation of the Center for Security Policy, our webinar on fighting for freedom in Iran. There are millions of Iranians who are doing just that at the moment. And we at the center believe very strongly that it is incumbent upon others of us who love freedom and who have the privilege of enjoying it to rally to their cause and to help them to the extent we can. To discuss both what is happening on the ground in Iran at the moment and the stakes for not just the people of Iran, but for the world in the removal of the totalitarian, mullahocracy that has misruled Iran for 4 decades. We have been joined by several distinguished Iranian expats now living in the United States and deeply involved in what is happening in Iran and in close contact with the revolutionaries that are in the streets of Tehran and cities across the land at this very moment. We're going to start with Marty Yusufiani, also known as Mehrdad Yusufiani. He is the president and CEO of Caspian Balestra Group, an operation that he has forged to lead, among other things, in smart or solar power generation plants in the sun-rich Persian Gulf. He has been a leader in this space, and we are delighted to have him with us today. Marty, over to you.
Thank you very much, Frank, for first of all hosting this and bringing our Iran experts around the table. This is, in my view, everybody's view in terms of the Middle East paradigm, one of the most important consequential developments we've had in the past nearly half a century. I'd like to start off by actually departing from what is traditional Washington speak, and that is typically hedging and positioning in terms of alternative views and so on and so forth. And I'd like to be bold and in fact declare that what the world is today witnessing is a revolution in Iran. Now, of course, we know revolutions are only declared such after the revolution is complete. And where we are on this line of revolution, beginning, middle, or end, fact of the matter is, once you look at the Iranian theater right now, this has all elements of a revolution. It includes all social strata, all age groups, all ethnicities, all economic standing in terms of the various layers of society. And therefore, I dare to say that we are witnessing a revolution, meaning that the totality of the Islamic regime is being rejected by the Iranian people, number one. Number two, I believe this is the most consequential feminist movement that Iran is projecting onto world stage, especially in that it is not coming out of Hollywood or New York, Los Angeles, or Paris or London, but as a matter of fact, out of Tehran and out of the capital center of Islamist Shiism. That in itself is a consequential consideration that I believe merits special attention, number two. Number three, in a bigger strategic viewpoint, I believe that we may in fact be witnessing what can be called a perfect storm, in that the alliance between Tehran, that's the Islamic Republic of Iran, and Moscow, which have increasingly demonstrated to rely on one another, whether it be military support or financial bypassing of sanctions, we may see a perfect storm whereby both Tehran and Moscow fall and thereby project an entirely new paradigm into the geostrategic construct of Europe on one front and the Middle East on another. In the Middle East, to be specific, we can possibly see the day after the Islamic regime, the unraveling of the so-called Shiite crescent. We can see how immediately funding towards Hamas, Hezbollah, and all the various proxies that the regime has been supporting in Iraq and Syria, and, for example, the Houthis in Yemen, that will all go by the wayside and introduce more stability, specifically in Iraq. And of course, the littoral states of the Persian Gulf will also benefit from that calm and mutually beneficial strategic alliances that is awaiting that market. So with these 3 points, I really think it merits important capital cities such as Washington, London, and Paris, and Brussels to pay close attention to the opportunity that exists today to side with the Iranian people. No one is asking for intervention of any kind, but at times like this, simple declarations of support is worth $1 million. And so I think when one asks, what can we do besides some of the obvious, the most important thing that Washington and important capital cities can do is declare in one voice and say the name Mahsa Amini. Thank you. Frank, I think we're back to you now.
Forgive me. Muting is a terrible thing to do when you're supposed to be moderating instead. Marty, thank you very much. I think that splendidly introduces the main thrust of what we are confronting at the moment and the importance of the United States as a interested party, shall we say. We'll talk more, I'm sure, about the roles that it should be playing, if not through some sort of intervention on the outside with your co-panelists. The next of whom will be Shukriya Bradost. She is a PhD student at the University of Vermont. She has also studied at Virginia Tech University previously in the area of focus of international security, specifically focused, of course, on the Middle East, from whence she hails. She's widely published and has been a very, I think, refreshing voice in the effort in our country to give voice to the yearning for freedom of the people of Iran. And we're anxious to hear what she has to say in her own right and on their behalf.
No, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Frank. And thank you for Center for Security Policy to hosting that event. I'm sure we are not the only one today. We're talking about what's going on in Iran. I'm sure there are a lot of panel, university, think tanks, they are talking about what's going on in Iran. For me, what that means, Iranian voice being heard in America. That means what's going on in Iran is really huge. It's not just, it's different with the previous protests. That's what we are today talking about it, because the audience, the Americans, not just American, Western society, they are listening to Iranian today. When I compare, why I'm saying that, because when we look at the Islamic revolutions, after the Islamic Revolution in 1979 until today, we had almost 6 uprisings in this country in Iran. And none of them have this voice that we have today. And why? Because I compare this uprising, this protest with the previous one, starting with the place that this protest started. And different with the previous protests in Iran, we had in 2009, we have even the students' uprising is 1999. Then we have a 2009 Green Movement. After Green Movement, we have another uprising to end of 2017, beginning of 2018. And then we have a two-day uprising was different because it started from one of the ethnic group region that's been forgotten for almost 44 years. And Islamic regime tried to securitize this region to kind of try to mobilize all the country against these people who are populated in that region, which is Kurdish region. So this protest started in that region. And maybe the regime didn't expect that all Iranian will stand with supporting Kurdish protests in Kurdistan region. That's the reason maybe when they found, okay, the girl that they killed, Mahsa Amini, 22 years old Kurdish girl, Gina, her Kurdish name, that was banned under Islamic regime's rule that the Kurds cannot have their own name. So when they heard she's a Kurdish Sunni woman, her killing wouldn't give the too much price for the Islamic regime. Maybe that was the reason they didn't know that girl killing that minority girl from the religious minority, ethnic minority, and a woman that, because the Islamic regime make them the secondary citizen, wouldn't have that much impact of and shaking the structure of this regime. But when it started from the Kurdistan, the protest with that Kurdish slogan of Jin Jiyan Azadi, woman life, liberty, and then this slogan was chanted in all over the country, it shows us that this is different. What's going on in Iran is different. And another point I want to make a comparison about why it's different, because all the time we have women in Iran, they've been fighting for their right, first say after Islamic Revolution, against this compulsory hijab, against this putting them as a second citizen, as I said, because we know it's not just about the compulsory hijab. Women, they cannot travel without their father or their husband or their brother to have that permission to travel. They have Iranian athletes, they can travel for the international game because they didn't have their husband's permission. So and there was a lot of rule, the Islamic regime abandoned women from practicing as a normal citizen. So what happened in Iran, that's not new for women in women perspective. But what is new, we can see not just women protesting for their right, men is supporting that right for women. So it shows that society, Iranian people, thinking differently from what regime for years they're trying to tell and sell to the outside audience that this is our culture. It looked like you telling the American like having this before Civil War, what we had, it was a culture and we have to keep that culture. I don't want to go for the American foreign policy. Today, we're just talking about Iran. So sorry if I don't want to talk about the Civil War, what happened in America. So today my focus is only in Iran. So that's the reason this is different, different when you compare this protest with the previous one. And another one, when you look at us, Iranian in diaspora, it was, for me personally, was the first experience to see all these people who've been living outside of Iran, which we know the number is more than 8 million people Iranian, they live in diaspora. Iranian Foreign Affairs, they say we register 4 million of them. So we know none of us want to have a registration in Iranian Affairs website. So the number should be more than 8 million. So when you see these 8 million people, so you say, okay, where was that voice? Why we didn't hear from them? But today, when you see the protests in Washington, D.C., based on the Washington, D.C.'s police, they told us there were more than 10,000 Iranian attended that protest against the Islamic regime in Washington. When we see in Toronto, in Vancouver, and in Germany, that amount of the Iranian protesting and chanting against Islamic regime, that's how make me to realize that this protest is different from what we had previously. Because most of these people, they traveling to Iran, they always trying to hide their face from the media. They don't want to show their face because that's put them in their trouble, not just them, their family back in Iran too. And now they bravely come on TV and come on the street and chanting death to dictator. That means they want that change too, and they trying to be Iranian voice too. So it is different. So when you put all this power together, if I'm not missing any other comparison, I'm sure Damun and Merdad will help me to make other differences between previous uprising and this time. You can see how what's going on in Iran is important. for changing this regime. But the most important, what would happen after the changing the regime in the Middle East? What is important for the Middle East countries, that change of this regime that, as Mehrdad already mentioned, how they supporting this terrorist group in the region. We know what's going on in Yemen, what's going on in Iraq, in Syria. The Islamic regime support with these all militia group, starting, if we're talking about the Hezbollah, the main and important group in the region, who are part of the Lebanese governing power too. And it's one of the reasons we don't have that kind of stable and country in the Lebanon. If you're talking about the miserable life of Lebanese, you're talking about the Syrian, how many Syrians been displaced, how many being killed, and the Bashar Assad stood in power, because the first help came from Iran, Islamic regime. The hope that Islamic regime looking for maybe Russia will be powerful, win the war in Ukraine, and they can come back and support the Islamic regime, which is far from the dream. And then you have Iraq, establish a new government in Iraq. Iran tried the best to destabilize Iraq, because a more secure, more stable Iraq and Afghanistan is mean Iran's the next for changing the regime. That's been the regime's policy for a long time after 2003. I'm not going to allow US have a rest in Afghanistan and Iraq, because if US is successful in this both country, that's me, I'm next. So that's the reason they played well to support Taliban, to support the Hashd al-Sha'bi, other militia group in Iraq. So when you look at the outside, I mean, the Middle East region, at the foreign policy of the Islamic regime, you can see how this change can bring the more peaceful and stable Middle East, not just for Iranian, for Middle East population too. And I don't want to keep talking about the what's going on in the Middle East. In the first round, I wanted to just talk about the inside of the country, what's going on, and why we have to see this uprising as a different from previous one. And I hope that these uprising, which I call it revolution, why I call it revolution, based on two factors. The first is that all people from different ethnic group, different religions, different classes, they are joined on that uprising. And secondly, they're chanting and attacking the structure, fundamental structure of the Islamic regime. They're asking for the changing regime. Before the previous uprising or protest, they were asking for fraud election. They were chanting, okay, we want our money to be spent inside the country, not in the Lebanon, another country. And this time, they're asking for different goal. Their demand is, we are fit of this regime and we want these regimes to go. They demand is clear: changing the regime, ending this brutal regime rule in Iran. I will stop here, and in the next round, I will focus more on the Iran foreign policy and this security concept of the Islamic national security, or even if they have a national security concept.
Shukriya, thank you very much. Wonderful sort of dissection of what is going on inside the country at the moment. We'll talk more about it, I know, in our question and answer. By the way, our audience can participate in the Q&A by going to the Q&A feature of Zoom and putting in your questions. We'll try to get to them in the course of the follow-up session of this program. But first, we're going to talk next to Damon Golriz. Damon is a lecturer at the Hague University of Applied Sciences. He is also a research fellow in its research group on international peace, justice, and security. He's a mechanical engineer by training, but has dabbled in the softer sciences, the political sciences and philosophy at Leiden University. He has been a very active contributor to the debates, both in the Persian language and as well as Dutch and English. And we're delighted to have him with us as part of this program. Damon, the floor is yours, sir.
Thank you very much, Frank. Thank you for inviting me. Thank Center for Security Policy. And it's actually quite difficult to speak after two of my friends. They have actually said everything you could say. I'm happy David is after me and will explain all the faults I have in my speaking. And I also thank Matthew for helping me with Zoom. I'm quite a disaster with these kind of technologies. So it's good to be here. Let me explain the first round in three parts. One, Persians are a revolutionary nation, like Americans. It's important to know because in the past 40 years, revolution, because of 1979 Islamic Revolution, has been something with a bitter taste for many Iranians, but also for many progressive Europeans and Westerners. So talking about revolution brings up a trauma of Arabic revolutions in the past decade, or a trauma of Islamic Revolution in 1979. But the truth is, in my view, that Persians are a revolutionary nation. Persians are also the founders of the duality of good and evil, the Ahriman and the Ahura. And that means that everything which is quite radical has to be in a revolutionary way, the same with French and also Americans. So that's one point. Second, Iran as the heartland of the world's corridors is the axis of connection between East and West, both in a geographic point of view, strategic point of view, and also if you look at the world now, the battle between the democracies and the closed societies, the open societies and the closed societies, you could see that Iran and the change in Iran will impact many other countries. It's even further than the Middle East or the western part of Asia. So any change in Iran will have its influence much further than only in the Middle East. And that's an important point I think many people recognize now. If you look at what happened during the 16th century, the battle between the Europeans and the Ottomans, it was the Iranians back then that changed the course by supporting the Europeans against the Ottomans. Or what happened in the constitutional revolution that brought up as one of the first countries in the Middle East, a sense of being ruled by law, being ruled by a constitution, has made its impression on the whole region. And lately, the Islamic Revolution, which brought up the Islamic terrorism and the fatwa against Rushdie, and so on and so on. So any change in Iran will change the Middle East, but influence the wider world, you could say. So also now, especially with this disaster going on, the tragedy in Ukraine, the support Khamenei is giving to Putin by sending drones that kill many Ukrainians, even sending out the members of the Revolutionary Guards to Ukraine to fight in killing Ukrainians, to Russia to kill Ukrainians. It shows how important it is that any change in Iran will also change the situation in Europe, the situation between the West and Russia, but also maybe the competition between the closed societies and China, especially the United States. So Iran as a heartland, a change in Iran, a radical change in Iran, especially for a revolutionary nation as Persians, will cause and will bring change to many foreign policy and strategic overviews. Third point I would like to make is to look inside Iran. What is going on there? I think it's important for our audience, but also for many to understand what is happening in Iran is a marathon. It recalls what Winston Churchill, after the first important battle, stated, the battle which was won against the Nazi Germany in Egypt. What he said is, it recalls me at the situation now. He said, this is not the end. This is not the beginning of the end, but it's perhaps the end of the beginning. And it's exactly what is going on in Iran. It is the end of the beginning of the fall of the Islamic Republic, but it's not going to happen tomorrow. It needs time, and it needs to understand how this domestic strategic development in Iran are unfolding. To comprehend that, I think that the domestic strategic development in Iran must be recognized by looking at two main trends that are unfolding. One is a track of integration of Iranians. We call it in Persian ruyesh milli, which means the integration of Iranians into one united nation against the Islamic Republic as a state which has only one thing to stay in power, and that's suppression. In this integration into a nation, a whole nation with all the differences that in the past 4 decades, by showing out these differences, the regime has managed to stay in power, are getting united based on a mixture of collective unconscious of being a Persian, being Iranian, having mutual compassion, because women are in the center of the heart of this revolution, and of willing to have a radical change that you can see and hear in the slogans. Khamenei must go, a regime must leave, and we need a different state. The second track, and what has been happening in the past few weeks, to get back on the first one, is that this matter of integration of Iranians into one nation is growing, and this weekend we will have probably one of the biggest gatherings in the history of Iranian diaspora in Berlin. Probably more than 50 to 100,000 Iranians will gather in Berlin to show their support for the compatriots in Iran. Second track, which is also important, it's the track of disintegration of the Iranian state power, or as we call it in Persian, the rizesh. The disintegration of the Iranian state power, especially the clerical base, is what is happening actually every day. Stakeholders like celebrities, former political loyalists to the 1979 revolution, the reformists, the Green Movement leaders like Mir Hossein Mousavi, and many others. And most importantly, the militaries, very slowly, but also steady, are disintegrating from the Iranian state. You could feel it, you can feel it, you can see it, you can mention it, you can notice it if you look at what is going on in Iran. Today, I read an article by one of the high-ranking revolutionaries who said, don't think that if you do not wear your hijab, the Islamic Republic will have less power. In other words, if you look at it from a Persian point of view, this gentleman is actually trying to somehow legitimize not having a hijab, which is the core existence, the core legitimacy of existence of the Islamic Republic. So this track of disintegration is happening next to the integration. So if you look at these events going on in Iran, and probably in the coming weeks, there is this balance of power between the Iranian people at one hand and the Iranian state, the Islamic Republic at the other hand. They're having this battle, and the core, in my view, the core message of this battle, or the core battlefield, is the battle of narratives. The battle of narratives that create power, that bring out leadership, a new form of leadership, and also will, at the end, improve the integration of Iranians on one hand, and also weaken the state for more disintegration. 2 questions: what can we do, and what we should understand? I think on the part of what can we do, in my opinion, is to understand that this battle is mostly a battle of narratives. A battle of narratives that has Iranian people with higher education and also having a pro-Western way of looking at their lives, want a different reality than the reality Islamic Republic is giving them. So trying to find out what are the narratives, especially in the non-Persian news outlets, is very important. The battle of narrative is quite important, and to support it in favor of the balance of power for the Iranian people. What we should understand, in my view, is that the leadership, the question of leadership of this movement is different than many other examples before. The leadership is not going to be centralized based on one person or one group or an alternative made in a 5-star hotel or whatever. The leadership has to be network-based, has to be decentralized, and is a new way of leadership. And to understand that is important for the Western policymakers who really need a business card and a telephone number to call the leadership. In this time, they have to have some kind of patience to understand that the leadership is different and is going to be different in the coming weeks, and is going to unfold such a leadership because it is needed. Because in politics, vacuum will not exist. This is what I wanted to share with you. I hope I can get some questions so I can elaborate on that. Thank you, Frank.
David, thank you. And you've added a lot of texture to what we're going to be talking about in the question and answer, and I'm sure we'll get an important response to it from our next speaker. My colleague and very good friend at the Center for Security Policy, Dr. David Wormser. David has a wealth of experience in government, as well as in the public policy arena outside of government. He has been a Naval Intelligence Officer, rising to the rank of Lieutenant Commander in the Reserves. He has been an aide to the Vice President of the United States and to the National Security Advisor, to an Undersecretary of State. He has, as I say, been inside the belly of the beast in the policy making arena at State and the National Security Council and the White House, and brings to his present position as the director of our Middle East programs at the Center for Security Policy, all of that, and a great deal of common sense, as well as deep knowledge of the region. David Wormser, we're looking to you especially to amplify on your thoughts as to what is the importance of our doing what we can in this moment and how best to do it. Welcome, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Frank. First of all, Damon, I can't correct anything, unfortunately. Yeah, we're both academics in a way, and we wish to point out things, but frankly, I agree with what you wrote or what you said. Now, I want to sort of approach this from a little, Frank just teed up, I think, the key question here, which was, I'm going to get out of the light here. The key question here, which is for me, which is what sort of an implication this could have for the United States, and do we understand really the importance of the moment? Back in 2002, 2003, when I was in government, 2003 and 4, one of the things that became very clear to us was that Iran was waging a war on us in Iraq through Syria and through itself. And it was impossible to fight that war because our understanding of Iran, Shiism, the Iranian Revolution was skewed. It was skewed by a narrative that had dominated the Western debate. And so the British, for example, thought that if you want to control the Shiites of Iraq, you have to go to Tehran, and Tehran will deliver them. But then you have to have a deal with Tehran over all sorts of things, the nuclear, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And they didn't understand that Iran was waging a campaign of assassination of domestic Shiite leaders, whether it was Khoy or al-Hakim and so forth, in order to take control of that community that wasn't loyal to them necessarily. The same thing happened in Lebanon. Hezbollah had to subordinate older Shiite structures. For example, the father of the Shiite uprising was Musa al-Sadr, and the Iranians wanted to have to claim that mantleship, that they were the father of Shiite awakening. So fortunately for them, Yasser Arafat and Muammar Gaddafi killed Musa al-Sadr. And the Iranians, of course, those were the first 2 visitors to Tehran. They were the most important foreign leaders for Tehran. Even though they were Sunni, they had been defined as killing Shiites in Lebanon, and they killed the father of the Shiite awakening. So you can see that the Iranian regime was a special type of regime, and it wasn't normal, and it was waging war on us. It was waging war on Shia Islam. It was waging war on Iran. It was waging war in every aspect. It was not a normal country. Unfortunately, though, the dominant debate in Washington was sort of integrating it into the normalcy of international relations. We were dealing with the Iranian regime as if it was a difficult, a prickly, but still within the realm of normal regime. When you deal with a country that's doing what it's doing right now to its women who have hair showing, to men who dare say whatever they don't want to hear, to girls in classrooms who don't want to sing a song of praise to Khamenei, you're dealing with a group of lawless people. They are lawless at their core. They believe in only one law, which is defined around a very narrow ideology they have in their corruption. And yet the West was dealing with Iran as if you could come up with agreements and treaties with a government that fundamentally doesn't believe in law. Treaty and an agreement is nothing but a legal document. And yet the government of Iran, starting with the seizure of the American embassy, showed it has no regard for law. So anyway, what I'm getting at is that our narrative in the West, and I think Damon made this key point, the narrative is the battle. There is a battle right now over the narrative of Iran that is being waged among Iranian expatriates and among Americans who deal with the area. And there's an attempt to delegitimize those who frankly had all along been on the right side, fighting for freedom in Iran and for pushing for an Iranian government that can be productive and helpful in stabilizing the region and moving forward the whole cause of freedom. That those have been delegitimized by a community that essentially was carrying water for the regime. And they had a series of myths. There's no leadership. Everybody still remembers the Shah. We hate him. If Iran doesn't have this strong government, they will spin out into a Syria-like civil war. You can just go down this list. But the end result of all these policy objectives was essentially give in to the Iranians, because it's worse if you don't. Then it was mixed with the idea that Frank has dealt with, dealing with the Soviet Union in the 80s and in its heyday, was this idea of moderates and hardliners, as if a moderate in the regime for some reason Rafsanjani or Khatami were true moderates who were Dubček-like figures or Gorbachev-like, Yeltsin-like figures. What it turned out is, no, these are various shades. There really wasn't a meaningful difference. Yet the rubric was used to paralyze our foreign policy. So I guess what I'm getting at is that there's a narrative that really dominates us. And one of the key points here strategically, I think we need to think about moving forward is, this also applies to the idea of Iranian identity. We sort of accepted the idea that as bad as the Iranian regime was, it represented something genuine, something Iranian, something that if we cross, we will antagonize all Iranians and cause a rally around the flag. And when you look at Iran, there are so many levels to Iranian identity. It is an extremely refined and complex identity. This is a country where the name Cyrus means something, even though he lived 2,500 years ago. This is a country where Ferouz, a poet who really invented the modern Farsi language, lived 1,300 years ago. He means something. Where, as Damon just pointed out, knowledge of what the Safavids did in the fight with the Turks and the Kizilbash and so forth, this matters. It matters now. What you see is the various layers of a sophisticated identity. And yet it was all reduced in our discourse to Islam and a specific concept of Islam that made it just kind of a different shade of Arab politics. Set aside whether that's even correct interpretation of Arab politics. But what it missed was that there are fundamental cultural differences between Iran and the rest of the region. One of which is that it is a great civilization. There are urban civilization, whereas the rest of the Middle East has a different pedigree, whether it's the Ottomans or the Arab world. It comes from a very different soul than Iran comes from. And that therefore what emerges in the Iranian malocracy era is it has to be dealt with as a civilization, not an Islamic country, not sort of, oh, that problem solved, so let's move on. Iran is a civilizational it is a civilization that anchors a whole section of the Middle East. And it has relations. I mean, again, we were skewed. There are long-term relations with Jews and with other Arabs and others that need to be dealt with and understood. So again, I don't want to go on too long, but I think we have to start thinking the day after. Everything I'm gathering from Marty, Shukriya, and Daman is that we are now at the cusp soon of a post day after scenario. Transitions and revolutions are very difficult. Usually old patterns assert themselves in new forms. So you could see the Revolutionary Guard reinventing itself as a mafia and so on and so forth. So the transition is so critically important. And as we enter this transition, we have to understand this battle of narrative involves battles of personalities. And we have to listen to those who got it right and not continue to fall back on those who got it wrong or were apologists for the regime, or else we will not pass through this transition effectively and safely. You know, I'll leave it at that. I have a lot more to say, but I'll leave it at that for question and answers, because I think that could be the discussion that follows can be more important.
Good. Well, David, thank you very much, and thank you for leaving some things for us to discuss in this Q&A session. One of the things that jumps out at me from what each of you have said in your respective ways is there's something different about what has happened in the course of the past 5 weeks from what preceded it. And one of the things that I'm struck by, and that I don't think anybody specifically alluded to, but in addition to the whole of the country seemingly now rising up in opposition to the regime and doing so in a very direct and pointed way, that irrespective of ethnicities and regional differences, religious differences, which is very heartening indeed for those of us on the outside hoping that this is the charm, as they say, is the fact that we've seen critical sectors of the economy now joining in, and notably, not exclusively, but notably the oil and gas sector. And I just wonder if any of you would care to comment on the point that David just made, which is that really we're now ripe for a conversation about the day after, what comes next, the transition, how do we affect that? Is that in fact now more or less inevitable, given that we're seeing critical elements of the economy throwing in with the revolutionaries? I don't know, would you like to take a crack at that, anybody?
I'll start. Anybody
Sure.
jump
Go
in?
ahead, David.
Yeah, and if you can clarify the actual question, I sort of got lost into following.
Well, the actual question is, we're seeing, as I understand it, among the outpouring of support for the removal of this regime now, critical parts of the economy, specifically workers in the oil and gas sector, which it seems to me Iran is unlikely to be able to, the regime is unable to survive if those people really are throwing in with the revolution. And I'm just asking, is that a correct understanding? And does that in fact now give rise to what David has suggested, which is it's kind of all over but the shouting, and we ought to be thinking now very seriously about what comes the day after?
Got it. Thank you.
Yeah, it
So
can
David,
take
go
a
ahead.
couple months. I think Damon mentioned it, Marty mentioned it. It can take a couple months. The original Iranian Revolution took close to 8 months, if I remember correctly. It's not a one day to the next affair. But what we see is it's not only the oil and gas sector. I believe the truckers went on strike today. You see the sugarcane industry is shut down. Just various sectors. The bazaars have been on strike. I'm not sure if the bazaar in Tehran is still on strike, but it was. And this is a structure that is tied in with the regime. So if it goes on strike, it's made a decision that its future lies elsewhere.
David, if I can jump in here quickly, and as we've discussed before, especially having been a practitioner of international political campaigns, irrespective of what we use in campaigns worldwide in terms of daily polls, quite often the most important element to look at is the overall trend lines, irrespective of the daily actions of who is up and who is down. And when you look at trend lines in Iran, those are the things to look at in terms of the depth, breadth, and energy level of the streets' passion for regime change. And just like, as you said, when you have oil and gas coming in, it's been sporadic. They come in, various pockets of them. They have, they have strikes, and then the challenge of sustaining them. And then the regime throws them a few months of pay, and then they sort of calm down. And as you rightly alluded to, the significance of the bazaar, as we all know, they are traditionally very, very pious, religious. And when the bazaar goes, there goes a very, very important link, or if you will, an umbilical cord to the clerical regime. So as you said, the oil industry, which history demonstrates is in fact what was the final straw that broke the back of the previous regime under the Shah of Iran. That is when things went completely kaput, when especially winter had rolled in, and then you had the army faced with a situation they couldn't move their trucks in the streets. Regular people didn't have fuel to heat their homes, to eat, to cook, to fly. So these are indications, and I wanted to just validate that for especially the observers not to look too closely to what's happening today and tomorrow or next week. Look at the trend lines. When is the next opportunity that we see the rats jump ship? As Damon mentioned earlier, the constant bickering and the in-house challenge or pointing fingers, who's at fault or what points we can compromise. These are all indications that the regime itself is starting to resesh or disintegrate from within.
And to this point, Marty,
yeah.
I'm sorry, go ahead, Shakira.
Actually, I want to add something about the economy. When we bring the economy part of this revolution or economy problem we have in Iran, many people may explain it in really different ways. Say, okay, all what we have in the countries is due to the American sanction, and they're trying to have this narrative in the Western media for a long time. But let's remember how the economic structure is Iran been established after the Iran-Iraq war, because we know these IRGC members, these military forces had the people's respect because they protected the territory in Iran-Iraq war against the Saddam invasion. But what happened after war? Rafsanjani, he declared a new plan. It's called a development plan in Iran after war. So what this plan played for the IRGC and all these military forces, actually, it was kind of, okay, I fought the battle, I protect Iran territory, now you have to give all the countries, economy, money, whatever they have to me. It is what's going on right now. After the Rafsanjani's plan of development in Iran, the beginning of the 1990s, we had a new structure for economy in the country, which they privatized the economy and they give it all the economy power to IRGC. That's the reason when here we're talking, okay, we need to put more sanction on the regime. That's exactly what we're talking about, because you put in sanction on the economy, you don't put a sanction on the, I'm sure no one's wanted to have a people under this severe economy crisis, but we know that removing sanction, what happened, lifting sanction in 2015 after GCPOA agreement, none of this money went to the Iranians' pocket. It directly went to the IRGC, and IRGC supported militia group in the region. So when you're talking about the economy in Iran, you have to remember that there's always stay with that kind of the argument that Islamic regime is against capitalism, Islamic regime is against privatization of the economy. But when you study Iranian economies in structure, you see so weird and interesting and new structure of the economy. You see the military privatization. I even don't think we can find it in any other different countries, that kind of the economy establishment. And then when you see just military controlling everything. So that's the reason maybe we don't see what happened during the 1979 revolution regarding Bazaris, a strike of the worker in the oil production, oil companies, because this time all of these people under control of the IRGC. So there is a military power over these people. So that's the reason it wouldn't be easy, but it's not impossible. Yeah. Which I always in all media, when I'm talking about what we need to do, we need to put these IRGC designated as a terrorist group. We put in sanction on that. When you see all these people who are doing business in Iran, they are some kind of related to this group. When you put a sanction on this group, you directly tell the people, whoever do business with this group, they are in the sanction and the terrorist list, the blacklist that we have. That's put this kind of the push to inside of the structure of the regime, that make the toppling of this regime easier from inside power, not outside.
Shukriya, this is really an important point. When we were negotiating the original Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, one of the things that I understand was served up by our government that further helped the regime, obviously, and bought support for it among IRGC and others, was the gift of thousands, I'm told, of green cards into the United States. And I can only imagine how offensive that is to the people of Iran, and the prospect that, who knows, some of those folks who are possibly looking for the exits in Iran might wind up in this country thanks to that arrangement. But it also raises a related question about whether one of the things that has to happen, talking about our policy approach at the moment, is formally terminating efforts to have a new Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action or some other nuclear deal with this regime. There's sort of a suggestion out of the administration that it's not as aggressively pursuing that idea right now, but I don't think they've abandoned it. And with it, the kind of legitimacy of this regime that inevitably is entailed if you're talking about negotiating with them or doing deals with them. Does that have to go over the side? David, I see you're up on the net. I don't know if you want to take that first, and then we'll talk with our Iranian friends.
Okay, go ahead.
Shukriya, go ahead. No, you're
actually, I just want to say, unfortunately, when we're talking about the GCPOA, why all European and American, they trying to restore this negotiation, this deal. And the reason they now changed their policy, because last thing we hear from the White House is that the main concern is not Iran nuclear deal, is about the Iran helping Russia in the war against Ukraine and invading Ukraine. And now the second point is the Iranian regimes cracking down the peaceful protests. So if you ask me why they changed their behavior, what happened? I think if we didn't have Ukraine in that picture, we wouldn't have that support too. So why? Because European previously, they thought, in American White House administration right now, they thought, okay, what we have, just Iran nuclear program is a danger for global security and for European. Rest of the Iran, what Iran is doing in Middle East, what they supporting the militia group, they attacking the Saudi Arabia's Aramco, the oil production, what they use the missile, the drones attacking Kurds in Iraq. It's not our problem because it's still in the region. But now they realize, no, that's not staying in the region only. Now Iran's delivering drones and missiles to Russia. The war, Iran is indirectly now is in the war with the European and with the NATO. So with what's going on the Crimea, now Iran sent even the group trainer to train Russia how to use Iran's drones. That now they see, no, Iran cannot stay in the Middle East. And that's the reason you cannot ask Middle Eastern country like Saudi Arabia, you have to increase your oil production, and you and OPEC Plus, you're standing against our interests. I do support the argument, actually. They say, okay, whenever the Iranian drones attacking us, what you do, you just condemning with the just condemning. So it's become a joke among Middle East people, actually. When they attack any attacks coming from Iran, they say, okay, yeah, we know what White House is going to do. Even they didn't have that kind of strong reaction when a U.S. military base has been attacked by Iran. So you can see what's going on. Now they realize Iran is not just a threat for Middle East, for Iranian people, it's a threat for the global security.
So it's time for tangible action. David, did you want to comment on that?
Yeah, I mean, the JCPOA, we just heard from some Syrian opposition figures that it was like a lightning strike against them when they were fighting the civil war, and it sort of left the field of opposition to ISIS, because the whole move up to the JCPOA, not just the culmination of it, the United States essentially had abandoned the field through it, and many in the region who were suffering under the attacks of various allies of Iran felt abandoned by this. So it had a huge regional impact. But I think it ultimately emerges from a false understanding in Washington of the regime. It comes from the old idea that there are moderates and hardliners, and that if you validate the moderates by engaging them on an arms control issue, it validates their moderation and builds them up in the regime, and then you get a third way, a transition to democracy and reform. And so that drove our policy, rather than the idea that there is no third way, and that therefore anything you give the Iranian regime is going to be used by the Iranian regime. So I think, unfortunately, what bothers me about this administration is, and frankly, the Washington foreign policy establishment, is they still believe in the fundamental narratives that led to the JCPOA. They still believe in it. And as a result, they don't have really a plan B. Yeah. So, unfortunately, the JCPOA, its problem isn't the nuclear issue at all. I remember having a big argument with Sawyers, the British diplomat, back in 2003. It's the validation of the regime that the agreement represents. It's not. Yes. It's not the nuclear issue that's the problem.
That's exactly true, David. Absolutely. The implications, and since we're talking about narratives, this has been one of the narratives that the regime has been playing with its domestic audience. Playing this game and this charade that, yes, through JCPOA, wink, wink, nod, nod, this is all a green light. This is all a validation of this regime. And the problem here with the West is the old story of the frog and the scorpion. We, every single time we cross that river, and we get stung, and then we say, oh my God, it's the nature of the beast. Well, one time, two times, three times, how many more? The other, again, picking up on the narrative story here is, something very, very curious is happening in Washington now. Just a couple of days ago, we witnessed the two flagships of center right and center left publications, both coming out in favor of what we're talking about, being very, very careful about sanctions, and that the sanctions are in fact hurting the Iranian women. This is quite astonishing, quite astonishing to the Iranian diaspora, as well as the Iranian in Iran. We have a wonderful representation here in Shukriya. You do not hear the Iranian women in the streets chanting, remove sanctions. They're chanting, down with Islamic Republic. And inclusive in that is the understanding in Iran that yes, we are in pain. Yes, we are paying dearly through these sanctions. However, we have reached a point that we do not care anymore. And for our liberal and our conservative friends in Washington to come and say, hey, maybe the sanctions are going to hurt the women, let's consider removing them. Well, why doesn't anybody look into what that means? That means giving the Islamist regime billions of dollars to buy the batons, the bullets, and the tear gas that they go and crush the skulls of the Masa Aminis. So
Yes.
Sanctions removal, a convergence of right and left coming together for that is an absolute no-no to the diaspora and the Iranian street. I think it's incumbent on Iranian Americans and Iranians anywhere to reach out to their representations and make a point of that, because that in itself will be seen as a gross turning back on the Iranian people.
Marty, there are those of us who have been following the machinations, both over the Obama years and certainly with this administration, as well as this National Islamic American Council, NIAC, as a example of a sort of regime influence operation that I suspect is very much behind that kind of campaign, which, as you say,
Absolutely.
is striking in that it is both sort of leftish and rightish.
They've been very effective. I think we all, the Iranian diaspora is clearly aware of the effectiveness of what's known as the Iran lobby, and it includes a number of different groups and individuals and personality. But that points to a different issue, Frank and David. You both know this very well, and that is the expertise, the efficacy with which the Javad Zarifs, classically American educated, who speaks eloquently and who knows the game and knows how to read the polls and the electioneering and how to lobby and which committee and all of that. They have been the master of weaving the corridors of power in Washington primarily, and also in Europe. So, but the tide is turning because the diaspora is coming together. It has awakened. They have, basically saying we will no longer drink from the lemonade or the Kool-Aid it is.
Yeah.
I may have a comment about the diaspora and this NIAC, because I always telling my other Iranian friends that, we don't just fight against Islamic regime rule for 44 years. In the US, we're fighting for an establishment that they've been established for 20 years. It's not easy. For 20 years, they've been established, all these link in the think tanks, university, and all media is most important part of they lobbying for that. But if you ask me, so because I fled Iran during this so-called reformists, I call it the fake fraction of the reformists during the Khatami time. But so why Iranian now in diaspora, most of them, they born and raised in America, they supporting this narrative of NIAC and what Zarif created, even previous of the Zarif, they created that from the Iran representative of United Nations. They started that kind of the lobby here. So if you ask me why they supported, I will tell you there is few argument here. Not all of them, they supported the regime. There are people who are born and raised in America. They never been in Iran. They never been in Syria. They never been in Iraq. They never been in Iraq. They never been in Syria. They never been in Iraq. 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 They never been in But what Nayak and other Islamic regime trying to approach to them, they trying to say, okay, you know, this honor of Iranian to be independent from all other countries, they trying to destroy us as a, you know, this honorable nation in the region. So that's the reason United States stand against us. For this, mostly are young people, the age is under 30 years old. So they don't know really what's going on inside of Iran. And other side, there are people who being paid, or they just sent it on purpose by Islamic regime, because there is evidence, there is a video, one of the IRGC commander, he talked about why they send some Iranian to outside of Iran. He said, we sent with the 3 ways. First, we sent them as students. So we support them, we give them the scholarship, we found them. And the second, we encourage them to marry. Imagine, to marry to non-Iranian. So, you know, for the Islamic rule, you cannot marry as a girl. I cannot marry to non-Muslim. I have to marry a Muslim man. So they pushing these girls, Iranian, to marry to non-Iranian, non-Muslim. So this is how they put influence on other side. And even the other LGBT community, Iranian lobbies, Iranian regimes agent, they are among the LGBT community, and they can travel to Iran and do the research and no one even touched them. And then I don't want to mention anyone's name because she is not here, so I cannot talk about her name. But there are LGBT community, they are in the US, well-known, travel to Iran, Iranian. So there is a question how you can travel. You're LGBT, that there are a lot of LGBT just for having this kind of the thought. They're in jail, executed, many of the LGBT executed in the jail. So you can see, but what we have, as in the first round of my talk, I said the diaspora is now standing with Iranian, because that diaspora who born and raised here, now they hear Iranian without the Nayak and Iran filtering that voice.
Damon, let me pull you into this. You've been very quiet to this point. We're looking at an effort, I guess, to help the people of Iran. And as has been mentioned, there's an inevitable desire on the part of governments like ours, assuming they actually do want to help, to look for somebody in a leadership role. And mention has been made of the fact that this is, you know, a network rather than a single.
Frank, I think we lost you there for a second, Frank. Damon, if you want to try to pick up. Because I think we lost Frank there for a second.
All right. I will. I think I got the point about the leadership. If he comes back, I will be quiet and then listen to his important question. So let me point out a few things. One, I think the golden card of Khamenei in approaching the United States and the Europeans is probably the revival of JCPOA. I think at the end of the day, from a strategic point of view, both the Europeans and the Americans, the American state, the American administration, is basically not losing hope in, here you are, Frank.
Yes, I apologize. Damon, I don't know if you caught enough of my question to you, but basically it's looking to some sort of leadership. I'd also just ask, because I think it's always important to calibrate. Some mention, I think perhaps by you, it was made of this big rally that's expected to take place in Berlin.
Yes.
In the past, those rallies have been often promoted by an outfit called the MEK. And I don't know if they're involved in this one, but if somebody could talk about whether they have some future role in the leadership of Iran, whether that's desirable. I'm not advocating for them. I just want to try to get ground truth here, as those of you close to this fight see it.
That's a very important question, Frank. I was before you came, I was explaining a point about the JCPOA. If I may, I'm going to
Please.
follow on that and then come back to
Yes,
your
go
important question. So I think the golden card by Khamenei is to have the revival of JCPOA. I think the Americans and the Europeans, if you look at the way they have sanctioned Iran in the past few weeks, it's quite cosmetic. It's not really strategic. Europeans have sanctioned 4 institutions and 11 individuals. I mean, what does it mean? What does it change? Does it change behavior? I don't think so. If you look at the political appointment of the Iran desk person at the State Department, which is Robert Malley, who has been negotiating with the Iranians for the past 2 years, he's still in his place. So if this policy is not successful, why is he there? So I think Khamenei has the golden card to actually use that when he feels the heat behind below his feet, to actually give this signal to the Iranians who are not so dependent on what West thinks anymore, I have to admit, especially after what happened during Obama administration. So they really, you can see it from the slogans, you can see how the Iranians are organized. The West is important, but it's not very vital anymore. But I think that the message it could be destroying the whole movement. That the message could be, you know, you guys are dying on the streets, but we are having some deals, and the important part, the strategic part of the nuclear issue should be resolved. So to be honest, I'm not in Washington. You guys are in Washington. You're much wiser than I am. You probably know this answer to the question. What is the thing? Is it really, do you really see a change of behavior towards the Iranian state in case of JCPOA? I don't see it. So that's the one point I would like to make. Another about your question. So this new leadership, way of leadership, is basically based on the Generation Z, or the Zoomers, as the Zoom we have now, Generation Zoomers. Those youth who, and young people, also the elderly, who understand that the world is changed from, let's say, a hierarchical way of organization to a more network-based and decentralized. That means that basically the factor that united people from Iran, outside Iran, are the values, the virtues. The Zan Zindagi Azadi, woman, life and freedom, liberty, are the 3 core values that gather people around each other. But it's not the leader. The leadership is a facilitator. The leadership is the one who has managed, basically is one of the victims of families of those who died in the Ukrainian airplane shot down by IRGC. Ismailion, yes. Hamid Ismailion, who has actually initiated somehow this rally in Berlin. It's supported by the Crown Prince of Iran. It's supported by many others, and it may be also supported by MEK. I don't know. At the end of the day, it's the Iranians who are gonna decide what they want, and I think Iranians have. You can feel it, you can see it. I mean, if you have time, I can explain it. Maybe I can elaborate on that. But there is some sense of knowledge about what is good and what is right and what is wrong. And I don't think personally that MEK has a lot of chance, to be honest. You see, while the Iranian women are dying on the streets because they don't want to wear the scarf and the hijab, the leader of the MEK is still wearing that hijab. It's quite difficult to cope with. I'm not saying that they don't make any chance. The Iranian people will decide, but that's an important mate. But as long as they are somehow trying to fuel these demonstrations in the diaspora, or fuel the change, the battle of narrative to shift the balance in advantage of the Iranian people, I think they're welcome. Why not? But will they be any, as they want to be, let's say a political organization as an alternative to the Islamic Republic? I'm not sure. I don't think so. Because what is needed in the sense of leadership is a network-based, one-dimensional, decentralized a facilitator as a leader, and not a leader in sense of I'm going to say what you're going to do, or in that category. It's a different kind of leadership. It's a platform, actually. It's like a Apple store. You need an Apple store as a leadership to have different kind of leaders coming in and try to fuel this change of balance.
Excellent points. Thank you so much. We're over time a little bit. I did want to just take advantage of this terrific team to ask each of you to just say in a very brief minute or so, if you could, specifically what you would like the United States to do that could make a difference in Iran at this juncture. And let's just stipulate for the purposes of discussion that not continuing these negotiations on the so-called nuclear deal is a given. I think that is obvious. But what else will express solidarity, will convey in a tangible way the support of the United States for the people of Iran? Can we go through the batting order from start to finish? Marty, shall we start with you?
Sure. There's so much that can be done. I think we can give you a whole list of items to do.
Just a couple.
Items not to do. But I think philosophically, to look back and look at some of the great moments that America projected its leadership and moral authority are moments when personalities such as Ronald Reagan said, Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall. Now, it didn't mean that he did not negotiate with them. It didn't mean that he did not try to bring some form of a dialogue forward, but he stood firmly and the world knew, and Mr. Gorbachev knew, and especially the Soviet citizens knew where Washington stands. Today, I can tell you not only Iranian people do not know where Washington stands, I dare to say that many of our friends, of our allies in the region have experienced over and over and over how the rug is pulled, how that firm spine is no longer one that we can lean on. So I would say if Washington is not going to do anything, as the Hippocratic Oath says, first do no harm.
Right.
Okay, do no harm by dealing with the suppressors. Do
Yes.
no harm by dealing with the Islamist regime, and be vocal. And when it comes to it, if only being rhetorical, be completely clear about where Washington stands.
Good, thank you. Shakriya.
First, before answering your question, I just want to say that we're talking about the changing regime, not changing government. And the modern history, what is important, what's going on is important in academia, most importantly. We're talking about a different revolution that happened, I do believe, because of the communication revolution, because of the young generation. More than 50% of Iranians, they are under 30 years old. And it is not just Iran. In Iraq, we have the same protests that happened by young generation too. In different countries, in most of the Middle East countries, they're trying to make some change in the law. They restrict, like other countries. They're trying to be more flexible because they're aware of that power. And Iran, some regime didn't want to change anything, because changing anything in this structure is mean that ideologically they're going to fail. So that's the region. What we see is a phenomenon. What we see is a different and new in the modern history, that this revolution would be different with comparing the previous revolution and studies in academia about the revolution, as how revolution happened. So we cannot decide that revolution is going to be successful or not. What we have is phenomena, what has new. About what US can do, I think now we all agree that Islamic regime lost legitimacy inside the country. So what I do believe is important now for European America to push this, take the legitimacy in an international organization on this regime, because it's not representing Iranian people by because we know we don't have any U.S. diplomatic relation with Iran, but we have U.S. allies have this relation. And we know the U.S. power over these allies because of these interests they have. So this time, U.S. can push for this kind of the policy, cutting diplomatic relation with this regime that's not representing people. I'm sure you all heard about how Elon Musk trying to provide stalling and internet. That's another part that U.S. can help with Iranian to have access to that internet. That, as I say, is a technology communications revolution. So we have to have access to that communications tools to hear their voice. That's two parts that I can mention. As Merda says, a long list. Let's keep these two parts for now.
No, that's great suggestions on both counts. Damon?
Thank you so much, Frank. I actually second what Shukriya and Merdat said, especially on not doing wrong things. That's very important. Just imagine what's going to happen if in a week the Tehran begs for the revival of JCPOA. I mean, that's gonna have a huge impact. So, three things. One, tear down the cyber wall. I think that's possible from technical point of view. Iranian needs to be connected, whether it's Starlink, whether it's VPN. There is a technicality to solve that problem, and America and the Europeans have that technical capabilities to do it. Second, on the war and narrative, the battle of narrative, I think the American public, just look at what Hollywood can do, or the celebrities, the artists, and the American government can also help, and the media, of course, in this battle of narrative, to understand which narrative is more important for the Iranian people and which is more damaging the Iranian state, and try to amplify those who damages the Iranian state and try to empower those who unite in an Iranian diaspora and Iranian people. And third, I think sanctions. Sanctions are quite important, but not only, let's say, putting sanctions, but also executing it. I think that's one of the main problems in the past 2 years, that Iran has managed to sell more than $30 billion of oil exports to China, among other countries. So a sanction is very important. Let me close with one quote. It's very important to understand the whole thing about leadership, this battle of narratives, and what the American can do. It was in the heat of 2019, while the Iranians were on the streets and more than 1,500 were killed by the state. President Trump retweeted some of the tweets by Persian unknown accounts because they were saying they're supporting the Iranian uprising. That's exactly what a facilitator and a network leadership do. Even retweeting Persian tweets by accounts which are anonymous. That's exactly the world we are living in, and that gives an example of what the leadership means.
Terrific points, Damon. Thank you so much. David Wormser.
Yeah, I second everything that's been just said. Do no harm. Sanctions, just one quick thing about the sanctions, imposing sanctions, and this really goes to one of the things that should be done, which is to choke financially the regime and turn over whatever assets that it has internationally into escrow accounts that are under the control of the opposition, partly to help strikers, for example, and so forth. But it's important to choke the regime as much as anything, because the regime is de-Iranianizing. It is bringing in Hezbollah to suppress the unrest. It is bringing in from Iraq militias, from Yemen. It is threatening to bring in Chinese workers to replace those in the oil and gas industry and truckers. So the Iranian regime is de-Iranianizing itself as we speak. And as a result, its ability to survive becomes more and more focused on its ability to have money to pay for this repressive structure and replacement structure. So it really is important to do no harm. Do not give them more money, but really aggressively choke off the funding of the regime and turn over its money to those who really need it right now. So that would be, I think, probably one of the most important things. The second most important thing is a clarity. We know from Natan Sharansky what the prisoners in the Soviet prisons felt when Ronald Reagan gave his evil empire speech. They tapped, through Morse code, they would tap on the pipes and communicate with each other. And all of them at once understood America will win and the Soviets will fall, because the moral clarity shown by the United States made the fall of the Soviet Union inevitable. And it gave them such energy, such adrenaline to fight from the depths of a Soviet prison. And this from firsthand accounts, and it's not just Sharansky, others have said that as well. So a clear statement from the United States: we are done with this regime. We have tried to treat it like a normal country for 43 years. It cannot be changed. We are done. And we are with the Iranian people against what is an increasingly non-Iranian regime.
Wow,
David,
very good.
Terrific points. We are, as I say, out of time, but I think that particularly this closing round has been enormously helpful to me, and I hope to our audience, and more to the point, really, to the public policy decision making that will be coming to the fore, we hope, in the next few days. Stop legitimating this regime clearly is critical. Start legitimating the people who are seeking to not just modify its behavior, but to replace it, lock, stock, and barrel. And I think, David, your suggestion about making funds available, I don't know where exactly things stand with the $7 billion that I think the South Koreans and others have been holding, whether that's been released to the regime or not. But if it's not, you could buy a lot of support for strikers in the various sectors we've talked about, the Bazaris, the students, the doctors, and others, with a fraction of that sum. But the biggest point, I think, David, is your concluding one. Moral clarity is something that has been absent from successive administrations. We focused to some extent on the Democrats. Even Barack Obama is now professing that it was a mistake not to have stood more solidly with the Green Revolution. But clearly, we have failed again and again and again and again under Republican as well as Democratic administrations to stand against the mullahocracy and for the people of Iran, even though it is transparently in our interest to do so, as well as in the interest of those long-suffering people in Iran. I want to thank all of you for the contributions you've made to clarifying just how vital this moment is, the stakes that are associated with it, the reasons we must not persist in the mistakes of the past, and that there are some very specific, some very practical things that we can do right now that can make a difference for the people, for their narrative, for the leadership that will emerge, and for the future of Iran, for the region, and of course, for our vital interests there and beyond. So I want to thank Marty Yusufiani, Shukriya Broadest, Damon Goldiz, and of course David Wormser, who deserves the lion's share of the credit for putting this program together, by the way, and we're very appreciative to him for that. But really to all of you, and as well to our audience, and your good questions, some of which we've been able to touch on, I think. And we're very grateful that you've been part of this program, and I hope that you will, as it becomes available at the Center for Security Policy's website, which is most easily remembered at securefreedom.org. When we post it there, please pass it on to others who have a need to know, as we do, about the choices, the options, and the opportunity. With that, let me say thank you to you all. God bless you and your great work. And we'll talk with you again in the near future, I hope. In the meantime,
Thank you, Frank.
Thank you.